Hey everyone, welcome to Groundbreakers to Harvesters podcast. We are so excited to be a part of you and your ministry and what God is uniquely calling you to. If you haven't done it yet, we do have a YouTube channel. We'd love for you to subscribe there. It helps us get the word out. If you're listening to this on a podcast, give us a rating, whatever rating you think is worthy of this. We know it's kind of a cottage ministry and a niche ministry, so we're not expecting huge followings. And if you can, like us on Facebook. It's Groundbreakers Life on Facebook, and you can always visit us online at groundbreakerslife.com and not only get this podcast but any number of podcasts. I want to welcome real quick our co-host Gerry. Gerry is a part of the ministry and the mission of groundbreakers.com and groundbreakerslife.com. And so Gerry, why don't you introduce yourself real quick to us?
Hi, everybody. What a great opportunity it is, right, to talk about what God is doing in our lives and this whole concept of mission planting, church starting, and look forward to talking with you more about this, Travis. What a great time.
It is a great time. And I got to tell you, Gerry, I'm very excited about the conversation we're going to have over this season that we're calling Church Planting 101. And it's not because we know all the answers and we're going to give you this, like here's the rules and the expectations and this is how to do it. It's more of us reflecting on, we've done this a few times. I'm working on my third church plant. You're working on your third church plant. And some of the lessons or some of the ideas that we've learned, often the hard way, over the last few years that'll help us kind of, and hopefully help you be successful in the unique calling that God has given you. So, Gerry, I want to start real quick. Like, church planting, boy, it's a journey. Amen.
Amen.
It's not an easy journey. How did you end up in church planting? Because you are not from the traditional kind of go to college, then go to seminary, and then start as a pastor, and then do the church planting thing. You actually come from the business world, and this was a calling later on in life. So, man, if you could just walk us through your journey to church planting, I know I would love to hear it, and I think our listeners would love to hear it too.
That's great. You know, I'm going to give you the Sunday school answer to begin with, right?
Of course.
God is the one who brought me into this. And then my second answer really is, and it was a little bit with some kicking and screaming too. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. But in the midst of my corporate career that I've had, I had probably the best end of career job you could ever want. I was working for the National Renewable Energy Lab in alternative fuels. And that was the type of place that, man, you didn't work a minute past the 40 hours that you were scheduled to do. Great benefits, but God had just laid on my heart this I call it a holy unsettledness.
Yes.
And I knew there was something going on. And so the way, I'm an engineer, so I said, okay, let's figure this out and put this into a process and an engineering plan. And so I started looking at what I needed to do. So for a while, I had thought about becoming a chaplain. So I thought, well, this is the time to start and figure out if that's what God is calling me to do. So I signed up for a master's level course called CPE. It's called Clinical Pastoral Education at one of the local hospitals. And so I volunteered many hours, went through classes together, and I would say I learned more about myself there than I've probably ever have. But in the midst of all of that and all the challenges that go with that, I had to really struggle and figure out what I believed, what I could stand up for. And again, in the midst of all that, I really realized God was calling me to become a pastor. And so again, in my engineering way, I started calling all the seminaries, started putting the plan together.
Oh yeah.
And Travis, I have to tell you, nobody would return my calls.
Isn't that amazing? Like, that
It
just
was.
shocks me. Like, here's a guy who's gifted and he wants to do this, and no seminaries, no one's returning your phone call. That just shocks me.
It did me too. And so I got really frustrated. I mean, it really was. I can't even explain how frustrated I was with it, because I knew God had called me into this, and I knew He had prepared me uniquely for this too. But I said, okay, I'm going to finally call this one guy that he traveled internationally. He's a very busy man, and I thought, if nobody else is going to answer the phone, this guy, the probability of him answering his phone is going to be really minimal. So I dialed him up, and guess what? He answered the phone. and
He's old school.
I was shocked.
He's old school.
Yeah,
Like, most of us
I
would
know.
let it go to voicemail if it's a number we don't know.
Yeah, and I was shocked because, again, this guy's very busy. So I said, hey, I need to talk to you about some stuff. He goes, you know what? I was going to call you. I need to talk to you too. And that a little bit set me back.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay. I said, you first. He goes, well, I'm going to be traveling out where you're living. And we lived in the Colorado at the time. And he said, I'd love to have dinner with you and your wife, with Sarah, and catch up, because I had been a president in a congregation under him.
Right.
And we had gotten to be really good friends. And he said, by the way, too, I want you to go worship at this place that I just, one of my favorite places in the nation to worship. And I said, okay. And where's that?
Yeah.
And he told me, and it was like 15 miles away. I'd never heard of the place.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, that'll be great. So let's do that. So then he says, so what'd you call about? And so I told him I thought God was really leading me into the pastoral ministry, but I couldn't get any answers from anybody.
Right.
And he goes, well, it's kind of interesting. This place I want you to go, the lead pastor there is the guy that's helping get this new distance education program for pastors that can't go back to the seminary. And it'd be a great place for you to really connect with him and learn about this new thing. And
love how God works. I love how God works. Hey, before you go on to the story, one of the things that
Sure.
you talked about, like, and I think it goes into, like, how do you know you're a church planter or you're not a church planter? Because there was a lot of off ramps for you in this process, you and Sarah, because you said you were pursuing it, you had gone through the process, you had called people, no one called back, and a lot of people would say, "Well, the door's closed." Right? What was it in you that made you persistent and to continue to pursue that in spite of all of these supposed closed doors, kind of thing? Does that make sense?
It does, and usually that's a part of the story I tell, and thanks for reminding me of that. Throughout my career in corporate, after about maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years if it was an especially challenging job, I would get this urge to go find a new job and do something different. It was one of those, again, an unsettledness that I knew I was the type of guy that was one of these guys who like to start things. And I've really, my poor wife, Sarah, she would see it in my eyes before it even hit me that I was at that point in job change. And so we literally moved, I think, 12 or 13 times in my career in that 20 years or something like that, 13 or 30 years. And we lived all the way from California to New York to Texas and many places in between.
Yeah.
But so God had really, I'm just that type of guy, Travis, that likes to start things. And when I get more into the maintaining mode or just the tweaking mode, I kind of get ready for something else. Kind of like you, right? Aren't you that way too?
Yeah, I'm very much that way. In fact, so the first church plant I was a part of is called Tangible Grace in Allen, Texas, and we launched in 2010, 2 years after the bubble crash of 2008, and it was not the ideal time, but like having kids, it's never an ideal time to plant a church. You just do it because God's calling you. And anyways, I was there for quite a few years, and it was year 5 or 6, and I was really depressed and just couldn't get out of my funk, and finally sat down at the foot of a counselor And one of the things he helped me remember is like, how do you play? And I realized that when I was a kid, the way I loved to play was I would get Legos, I'd build what was on the box or what was expected one time, and then I would deconstruct it, throw it all in with the other pieces, and then I would build something brand new. I'd show it to a handful of people, I'd deconstruct it and never build that piece again or never build that creation again, and then build something brand new. And what he helped me realize was that's like my DNA. Like, even when I was in youth ministry, I would spend 3 or 4 years creating a ministry that I'm like, yeah, this is it. And then live in that for 1 year and then deconstruct the whole thing. I was like, I'm horrible. We're going to do this all. So it definitely is like, it is a part of my DNA and it's part of your DNA. And it took me too long, I think, to realize that was a gift from God, not a curse. Because a long time I saw it as a curse because it wasn't the typical pastor approach, you know?
And I think for me too, that I almost felt like there was something wrong with me because I couldn't just be settled, be happy with things going well for a period of time. But what I realized is that there's people like you and I that are needed to get stuff started. And then there's a huge need for people to come after us to really help not just maintain, but to improve upon and to add to, but not to start from basically from ground zero. And I think, like you said, when I finally realized that and realized that's how God had wired me, that is probably what got me into church planting after I got into the ministry, more than anything. And it's just part of us. It's an awesome thing.
So go back to your story. So he tells you about the church that you need to go to. The senior pastor at the church is helping create this new program called SMP, which is the same program I went through. I believe it's specific ministry pastorate. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
I call it pastor light or diet pastor. It depends. Because we have all the responsibility and zero authority. But anyways, it doesn't matter. And now I'm looking for a new job. No, I'm just kidding. So here you are. You go to this new church, you and your wife, Sarah. By the way, my wife's Tara. And so there is a sainthood for church planter wives that they are true gift from God. So what happens when you're at this church? What happens next?
Well, I just have to kind of rewind a little bit and tell you one other thing. I will tell you that the minute I hung up that phone with my friend, after hearing about this, I literally broke down in tears because God is so faithful and so good. And what an answered prayer that was for me and in a very tangible way. So anyway, fast forward to this church. It was crazy. I went to this church. Sarah and I loved it. We were kind of unsettled at our church we were at. And so we went to it, and I have to tell you the story. Here's this crowd. I mean, this church worships about 1,200 on a weekend, so it's a fairly large LCMS church. It's one of the mega churches in our tribe. And in the middle of this area that they gather, right in the middle of the worship services, people coming in and out. It's just crowded, lots of noise, and the crowd kind of parted. And here's this guy walking towards me. And so I introduced myself to him. He didn't know me from Adam. I didn't know him from Adam. He happened to be the business manager there. And he started sharing with me how incredible this new SMP program was coming up. But he said, we have gone through, and again, he didn't know why I was there. He didn't know me at all.
Right.
And he said, we've gone through our list of all the people in this congregation, and we can't find enough people to fill the SMP slots we want to fill.
Are you kidding me?
I am not kidding you. and all I could say is that's why I'm here. And the story, I mean, when the lead pastor heard about it, he was speechless. Because it truly was God getting us connected, working it. And I always joke with people. I said, when this happened to me, it was God was flinging the doors open, and he
Yep.
was shoving me through them.
Yep.
And if I didn't follow him, I would have been in direct disobedience of what God wanted me to do.
Yep. Absolutely. And what's so funny, so it's one of the things that someone encouraged me early on in ministry is in the Old Testament, they had this tradition of anytime they encountered God, they would lay down 12 stones or build a stone altar that would be there for generations, so that kids and grandkids and great grandkids would be able to look at that and be reminded that's a moment that God encountered his creation in a miraculous way. And I think as church planters, that's one of the things that we have to become diligent in, because I love these nuggets of story where you're like, God totally showed up. He wrecked me. He did what only he could do. He went before me to prepare this conversation. On a Sunday, I just rolled in, and this business manager, and this is like an altar moment where God showed up, intervened in our humanity to do what only he can do. And as a church planter, you'll have those a lot. You'll think you'll remember them all, but if you don't journal them down, you won't. And so that's my encouragement today for you guys that are thinking about doing church planting. Be on the lookout for these moments and just journal them down. And when the road gets hard and you begin to question that calling, go back and go, oh, wait a second. This isn't by accident that I'm here, So continue on, man.
Well, I just one more story that in that light, and my mother-in-law had passed away 14 or 15 years earlier, and she had one of those types of people that had recorded her voice and some things on tape, and I know that's a real ancient technology now, but she had done that, and also as well as written a lot of stuff down in journaling, and so my brother-in-law finally got some of those. I shouldn't say finally. He got some of them transcribed, and so while I was struggling with this whole thing going into seminary, that during this time after I'd been to the church and had applied, I get this letter in the mail from him, and in it is an envelope that is a transcribed letter from my mother-in-law. Again, she's been passed away for 14, 15 years. And in this letter, as I read it, it says, Gerry, I really encourage you to become a pastor.
What?
And so, I mean, you can't make these stories up.
Oh, that's awesome. And and the brilliance of God again, and his mercies are new every day. But the fact that at just the right, like if you had gotten that 14 years ago, you'd been like, oh, whatever. And you would have forgotten it. But the fact that it came in at just the right time when you needed that altar for God to say, the road's going to be hard, so you need to remember this moment. So boom, here's a letter from 14 years ago from your mother-in-law. That's awesome. So and so you get into S&P. I'm sure there's a moment where you realize you gotta leave the corporate world, get into church world, which is a whole nother series of podcasts. What's your first church plant experience? Like what was that like? I'm guessing it's in the Colorado area. What was that like? Is it a traditional, like what was it like?
Well, it was a multi-site. This church was wanting to expand, and they had looked at all the different models and felt like the multi-site was the best one for them.
And a lot of churches do that.
Yep, and there's so much value in a multi-site model in that, as we've talked in the past, you've got lots of resources, you have people and systems in place that can help out.
HR departments.
So there's a lot of there's really some great value in it. So that's what we decided to do. So we went to a bunch of seminars across the nation. We went and visited some multi-sites from some of the more non-denoms, the ones that have been successful, and tried to learn best practices from them. And then we got into the process and went out and did the community listening and looked for places to meet. And we actually ended up launching a multi-site in Greeley, Colorado, on 10-10-10, and I don't know if that's a date you used or not, but that's the one we launched on.
That's awesome. No, we were before then. We were in January of 10.
Okay, yeah. There's a big movement across the nation to launch a bunch of new church starts on that date, and we did that, and it was awesome. But But as we grew and we moved into a new facility and really became a viable congregation, one of the challenges we did in multi-site is that the larger site, or if you want to call it the parent site or the mother location, um, they need to be managed as a large church.
Right.
And of course, we were a small church, so we needed to have more of a small church feel and small church approach. And the community we were in was significantly different than the community that the larger church was in. So we were constantly trying to figure out together as a staff how to do this. And so that is the challenge with multi-site.
Right.
Is that flexibility to and the awareness of the different needs of that multi-site. And so that was a little bit of a challenge, but fast forward, it's doing well. It's been, I think, it's 11 years now in existence, and it's been a great thing.
So then you're there in Colorado. You're doing a multi-site, and you are very. I mean, that's another conversation to have of like how to navigate a multi-site when the needs of your specific community you're called to as a multi-site is different than the needs of the community of the mother church, if you will. We can talk about that later, but what got you to leave that situation and really jump into the deep end and basically be parachuted in, which is a model that's out there, dropped into a community you're not familiar with, partnering with churches you've never been a part of before in the Temple area of Texas, and start a church from scratch?
Yeah, well, and it's a little bit of a change in what you said. It's actually in the Killeen area. Killeen, Fort Hood, Harker Heights area. So it's a huge Army installation here. Yeah, I mean, what an interesting thing. So if you want, it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll tell you, because it's another God instance.
Absolutely.
My wife and I really felt like we wanted to get closer to our grandkids and our daughter and son-in-law who lived up in the Fort Worth area. And so I'd only been in ministry for 8 or 9 years, maybe at most. And so I'm not really
felt like 100.
Yeah, but I'm not real familiar with this call process thing because I'd only had one call, and it was to a multi-site that was pretty straightforward. So I didn't know anything about it. So I went in and talked to my senior pastor and said, "Hey, someday, I don't know how this works, and is there any way we could get back to Texas and just so we can be closer to family and all that the older we get?" And so I said, what would you say? And he goes, well, he says it usually takes years. He said, but just, maybe talk to this person. I'll make a phone call and just see kind of if something's going, just to let people, make people aware that you might be available for that. And I said, okay, great. So we did. 2 weeks later, I get a call and said, we want to do an interview with you for a call to the Killeen area to plant a new church.
Love it when God moves,
Travis.
Yeah. I love it when God moves.
And so Sarah and I looked up Killeen, and we go, nah, I don't think so.
Yeah. No.
But I said, okay, well, I'll do the interview. So I did the interview. And they called me back and said, we're going to call you.
Well, all right.
Within days. And I go, I thought you had other people. They said, nope, we took them all off the list. You're the guy.
Love those moments from God.
I go, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And so then we set up a trip out here. We came out. We knew God was calling us here. So we accepted the call, and within like 2 months from the time I made the first phone calls, we moved out here.
Wow.
2 or 3 months. My lead pastor said, he goes, the speed that this happened was breathtaking.
Yeah. Yep. And that's so often that is, it leaves me breathless because again, you like to be on, like, I love guys that can do large church, small church, and churches that have been around for 100 years. I was just at a congregation, one of our partner churches for the next church plant, and they just celebrated 100 years of mission and ministry in
Yeah,
the
isn't that
Denton
amazing?
community.
That is,
Oh, and him and
it's
his gifts to do that.
phenomenal.
But
Yeah.
but doing this church planting groundbreaking thing that you and I are called to, God is so gracious to us because He's like, there's many times you're going to want to quit and go to work at Starbucks. You need to know I have called you. This is not your idea. This is not your, this is a calling from God. Again, my encouragement to guys and families that are thinking about this is, if God is calling you, literally there's nothing else you can do. And I think that's what Gerry and I realized throughout our ministry is like, there's nothing else we can do. People are like, well, when are you ever going to be like, go to a big church? And I'm like, no, never. Because this is what I'm called to do. And I'll break a big church really quick. But it's so important that our wives and our families are a part of those journeys and realize this is going to be hard, but God is gracious and He's with us. He's for us, not against us. He even sings over us. And in those hardest moments, in those darkest moments, we need to be reminded that He's been the one that's been orchestrating this thing from the beginning. And it's so important.
He is so faithful in that. And boy, I'll tell you, like you said, though, it's not easy, because when it's time to go in his world. And I don't know about you, but sometimes you'll pull out your gifted list out of your back pocket and say, Lord, this isn't on my list.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think so. This isn't on my list. I'm not equipped. I haven't had the experience. I don't, I think you got the wrong guy. And then have you ever done that?
Oh yeah. And then Jesus goes, well, Peter, why don't you step out of the boat and see? And you're like, oh, fine. I still need your rescue, but fine. Yeah. So you do the church plant in Killeen, and but that's not where you're at now. You're actually going on to another church plant, and I think one of the things that we really want to through this podcast is get out the idea of this other option, which is actually I think an ancient option. Our next church plant's our next podcast, we're really going to dive into the specifics of it, of this apostolic church planting approach. And, the first one was multi-site. The second one was kind of a parachute in with an apostolic thought to it, but not really understanding it. This third one is very apostolic from the beginning. Talk us through that a little bit and maybe give like a glimpse of what an apostolic guy is like, so that guys that are listening to this might go, yeah, that sounds like me.
Okay. Well, and you talked about this a little bit, the one that I came to Killeen for. I think some of the people felt like it was supposed to be an apostolic church plant, but again, as you said, I don't think we understood really what that meant, and the people the churches that were supporting it really didn't understand it fully either. So this one that we're involved in now, that I've been involved in, and there's a whole other God story about that too. He seems to just kind of pull me into places, but we don't need to go there. But what's so different about this is that, the parachute type of one, or the one that I know that our tribe seems to had favored up until now, was where you went in and started from ground zero, and you built the team, you got the resources, you found the place, and you did the community listening as the pastor coming in, ultimately becoming the face with the place for that congregation, until the congregation got to a point where maybe they could call somebody new to come in.
Right.
And so we know there's challenges with that, right? The more years that a person stays in that congregation, the more that congregation becomes really attached, and really it becomes that person's congregation.
Right.
And that's not bad. It's just in a church planting world, sometimes that cannot be the best for the congregation. Right. So fast forward to, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, no, it becomes more personality driven, because often, there's a certain charisma church planters need. And I don't want to say arrogance in the negative, but there needs to be a ignorance, maybe is a better word, of like, it's just going to work, it's just, there's nothing here. There's no community. There's no vision. There's a vision, but there's no culture. There's nothing. And you just have this hubris that's like, we're just going to roll in. We're going to pull some people together and we're going to make it work. And and then to have that same personality be the guy that 10, 15, 20 years later is still organizing systematically that church, that can be a hard thing. And when they
Mm-hmm.
leave, and they will leave, people are sometimes more attached to that personality than the actual
Mm-hmm.
cross of Christ. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing that we're trying to address in some ways.
Mm-hmm. So talking about the apostolic model, which is what you and I both are really digging into here now,
Right.
is from the very beginning, the Apostolic Church Planter is working themselves out of a job. Their goal is to not be the face of the place, but to come in and support a team of people that God has assembled and help them get this new start going. And so, for instance, the one that we're going to in Waco, there was already a team of people that God had assembled together. And it had
Mm.
been 6-7 years they had had this dream to start a new church, but could never get it started.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody like myself, who is gifted as an apostolic church planter, and I don't mean that in a like you said, an ego way or anything. It's
No.
just how I'm wired. It is, I come in and as a mentor, as a coach, as a leader, and yes, at times I'll be leading as a pastor, but really lifting them up, raising them up, helping them figure out how to do this and work right alongside them to do the community listening, to figure out the needs of the community, to start gathering a group of people together and really form this place that will ultimately be a Word and Sacrament location. And in the midst of that, raise up hopefully what we've been calling a Timothy pastor, a
Right.
pastor who ultimately would be the one who would take this on and lead this congregation when the Apostolic Church Planter goes and starts something different and new. And that's been really exciting for us at this place in Waco, because there's a Timothy pastor that's been raised up, and he actually is applied now for S&P, and he's going to be starting seminary in February. And
Wow.
that's an amazing thing that God has provided that already, this early in the process. Um, and and I guess just a kind of a rewind a little bit. That's what happened at our church here in Killeen too. This place called that we call Fortress in Killeen. God has raised up a Timothy pastor there too, who's currently going to seminary, and he is taking over as I move more towards Waco. So it's a pretty cool model.
It is, and it's an ancient model because it's what
Hmm.
we see Paul doing in the New Testament, but
Hmm.
it seems to be a rediscovered model for us today. So, Gerry, in closing, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm excited about the conversations we're going to have, and hopefully some of the different seasons, things that we're going to unpack, like what's the characteristics of an apostolic church planter, what's the characteristics of a Timothy pastor, what does it look like to the language that you keep using is community listen, and how to, and that one's for all churches need to
Hmm.
learn how to listen to your community in more effective ways, because often we get so wrapped up in our own bubbles that we forget that we're actually called to a specific place with specific people with a specific message of grace and mercy, and how do we break down walls and barriers so that they would hear it anew and by the grace of God come to embrace it as their truth.
Hmm.
So I appreciate it. For those listening in, thank you so much for giving us a half hour of your day. Again, go to groundbreakerslife.com. We have multiple different podcasts up there. One is Groundbreakers Life, one is Encouragement in the Ordinary, and the other one is called Known Legacy. And all of them will be a blessing to you and your families as you enjoy this journey. So, Gerry, in wrapping up, what's the one thing you would say, if you could take one thing away from this conversation, what's the one thing you want people to take away from it?
Uh, if God's calling you to be a church planter, if God's calling you to get out and start and just follow Him, it's an amazing journey. I'd encourage you to do it. Um, but on this other side of it, it's going to be probably one of the hardest things you've ever done, but it will
Yep.
be probably one of the most rewarding things. And what a great thing. And so just go step out and in faith. God is faithful, and He will show you the way, and He'll provide what you need when you need it. And it's a great journey. And God will bless you.
I love it. I love it. And hey, if you're on the journey and you need a brotherhood or you need some guys to bounce some ideas off of or get coaching or just get conversations, please reach out to Gerry or I. Again, Groundbreakers to Harvesters. The website is groundbreakerslife.com. We would love to be a part of that journey because, we've learned a few things because we've seen a few things. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. God bless you guys, and we'll see you soon.